fraud can affect all of us. And someone who knows about all areas from prosecution to defence is Lee Adams, and he joins me now. Well, thank you, Lee, for joining me today. Yep. Now, you are a bit of an expert in organised crime, not doing it yourself, hopefully, but prosecuting and defending. So can you tell me a little bit about your background? So you work for solicitors at the moment, is that right?
Yep, I'm a partner in the firm of JMW Solicitors. I actually run the London office. I've been a solicitor for 12 years, going on 13 years in February. And that entire time I've practiced within the area of criminal law. So started like most private sector solicitors doing criminal defense work. I've done a pretty broad range of work, everything from drugs to fraud to murder cases. And in more recent years, like many private sector solicitors, we've turned our hands to prosecuting cases. I mean, there's lots and lots of information you can find out there about how under-resourced and the Crown prosecution at the moment. But what that's done is it's opened the door for private solicitors to prosecute on behalf of victims as well.
Do you feel that's a big change? Because obviously you started off doing it for defendants, and now you're moving to prosecution. So what have you had learned since?
Absolutely, it's a huge change actually, because when you defend mainly, I suppose the best way to put it is you are looking for holes or gaps in the prosecution case. You're looking to see where they've failed to gather evidence or where they failed to retain evidence properly, or even where they've had serious failings in what evidence they've even shown the defense. So when you're defending, you're mainly looking to pick gaps in the case, but when you're prosecuting, obviously that gets turned on its head, and you have to make sure that your case has no gaps in it. So the main change is learning to build a case from the ground up and making sure you've got a solid evidential basis for everything, and that some clever defender isn't going to start dragging your case down once you've got the case off the ground and taken it to court.
But I was knowing both sides there can give you that kind of extra insight into know what you would look for so that you can build it. But obviously, like they're very different people, aren't they? Different sides of that. Is there a little bit of the moral in you that is like, oh, I'm defending a criminal?
Well, I suppose the first thing to say is, when you are defending a case, when a client comes to you, you don't always know whether they've done it or not. You do get innocent people when you're on the defense side. And of course, even if you have somebody who is guilty, and you can see that either from the evidence or because they admit to you what they've done, you're not always in a situation where you're taking the case to court and trying to defend them. A lot of the time your advice is, look, the evidence in this case is overwhelming and you should really consider pleading guilty, and that's my advice. And actually, the majority of the time, people who are guilty do plead guilty. But I accept there is that small percentage of cases where somebody wants you to fight tooth and nail for them all the way to the bitter end. And on one view, you may think that the evidence is overwhelming, but it's up to the jury to make the decision at the end of the day, not me as their defense.
You can only advise.
But in relation to, absolutely, yeah. I mean, but that comes with experience. Where, I mean, actually, when you're on the defense side, the more common moral dilemma that I've encountered is not where you've got somebody who's guilty but wants to plead innocent, and that they're guilty. I've come across several examples where somebody is definitely innocent but wants to plead guilty in order to cover up the crime for somebody else. I've had that a few times. Drug possession cases, fraud cases where they've been committed by their partner, but they don't want their partner to go to prison. I suppose not one of my cases, but one of the more famous cases of that was probably the Chris Huhne case, where he said that it was his wife who was driving his car. his wife also said, Vicky Price also said she'd been driving the car. I think that's what happened. And there was also a judge who also supported her case. So, that was a good example of where actually, one person was saying they'd done something when in order to protect somebody else.
You got to think about the psychology of why people do things like that, and why would you take the fall for somebody else? Do you find that also that does like come across in a lot of the things you do? You have to find a bit of more of a personal level. So think about, why have you done this? How can we help you through it? Do you ever get yourself into like that therapy section?
Oh yeah, I mean the joke amongst criminal lawyers, and I suppose probably family lawyers are like this as well, is that you sometimes feel that you're social support for your client as well as a lawyer. And yeah, the difficulty is separating out the emotional side of it from the legal side of it, and remembering of course that you are providing legal advice. You're not there to be somebody's friend, but at the same time you are dealing with people who are in very, very difficult situations, and you've got to be human about it as well. I mean, that's never more evident than when you're prosecuting a case, because of course what I've found is that consideration, because you're acting for the victim, that's actually much more tricky to deal with than when you're acting for a defendant. Because with a victim case, you do have to prosecute a case very, very even-handedly. You can't go after a defendant in a way which is improper or unfair. So balancing being sympathetic to the victim on the one hand, but also doing your job properly as a fair and impartial lawyer, that's the trick, really.
And is it even more difficult when you have like longer cases? So obviously you work with, I do organised crime cases, and I'm working like business as well for fraud. So do you find that takes up a lot more of your, I guess, emotional capacity, constantly trying to be on top of things? Because you're obviously not doing just one case at a time either, are you?
No, I mean that's I suppose that's a lovely myth, which is if you watch American dramas, the lawyer's only ever working on one case, and they're living and breathing that case day and night, and there's nothing else in their world. But I think the reality is that you are normally spinning a number of plates, and you never want to say to a client, I'm sorry, I've been doing something else. I'm not fully up to speed on your case, because to them it is the most important thing in the world, and rightly so. So it is difficult and emotionally draining sometimes, being able to click your head into the right case and instantly deliver for a client. But working for a firm like JMW Solicitors, it's so well resourced that you can have people assisting with every part of the case. I come from a small firm background. JMW is actually a pretty big firm in the grand scheme of things, and my small firm background has taught me to deal with everything myself. So I was advocate, solicitor, I did all the filing for my cases. And so I learned to be very, very self-sufficient. But coming to a bigger firm, it means that you've actually got people on your team to help you spin those plates. And it's been really, really helpful.
God, but I loved you when you started. You were probably like, no, don't worry about it. I'll just put that away. I'll just do that. Don't you worry. I'll order the Post-it notes.
I'm the most grateful employee and partner that they've ever had. And anything that they've done, I've gratefully received.
Well, I'm sure they'd like to hear that. Obviously coming from like your background as well, though, because saying going from like a small firm and being like more intense in what you're having to work on, do you find that now hard, actually stepping back a bit?
Oh yeah, I mean it's a real challenge for anybody, for any solicitor who's been used to working on their own, to learn to delegate effectively. I know that sounds like such a management cliche, but when you're dealing with criminal cases, again another cliche, but you do feel like you've got somebody's life in your hands. Either somebody who could go to prison for a long time, or somebody who has been a victim of crime and is looking for justice. And letting go of a bit of that responsibility to somebody else, even another very, very qualified lawyer, because you're not just letting go of the legal process, you're letting go of what you touched on before, which is the emotional side of preparing a case. So yeah, it's difficult stepping back and knowing now, right, I'm running a bigger team, and I've got to take more of an overview of the case and maybe have strategic direction, and I'm not going to be, face to face with the client or the witnesses on a daily basis. Yeah, that's pretty tough.
And have you also found that obviously being in this pandemic even like weirder, because obviously having to step back when you've got a team around you is one thing, but that's your job, but having to kind of weirdly step back because you can't do face to face, how have you been finding that?
Yeah, that's really difficult. I think the saving grace is that we're all in the same position. So it's not as if I've, suddenly moved out of the country and I'm now trying to run my practice via Zoom. Everyone's in the same position. So, we've it's been a bit of a journey, as I'm sure you've been on yourself as well. Doing everything at arm's length through a monitor. But there are occasions where, I mean, our office is still open. It's COVID secure. We have occasionally had people into the office to conduct face-to-face meetings, because that human element of being able to see somebody, previously shaking their hands, but we don't do that anymore. Just having that face-to-face is so important. And through a monitor, I mean, I suppose what comes to mind is actually that there has been a parallel to that in criminal trials for some time. So may be aware that sometimes victims of crime give evidence via a video link. So, in some cases where a victim doesn't want to be in the same room as the person they're accusing, the theory is that if they give evidence through a video link, seems like a very old-fashioned term now, but over Zoom or something like that, then the emotion, because they can't see the defendant, it will be slightly less emotive, so that they are able to give their evidence in the best way. So actually, there have been some parallels in the criminal justice system for a while.
I guess that's the same also with a lot of child cases, isn't it? Because they do a lot via video, or prisoners as well. But I mean, do you think that, because obviously, yeah, everyone's in the same boat, you're right. But obviously there's the police and the CPS side of it when you're collecting evidence. Do you think that someone along the line down the future could turn and look at your cases when you're working with the police and say, oh well, your evidence potentially isn't 100% there because you couldn't get in and get that information yourself? Is there that kind of worry?
Yeah, always. I mean, just because we're living in a post-pandemic or pandemic world, doesn't mean that we throw all the rules of evidence out the window. We have to, where possible. So we don't work with, as private prosecutors, we don't work with the police directly, but we work with ex-police officers who are now independent investigators. They know exactly how to gather evidence and work their way around the case. They just don't work for the police anymore, and they will follow all the same procedures as previously. So if they are going to take a witness statement, they do try and see the person face to face, and get the body language and get a real feel for how that person would actually stand up as a witness in court. Are they a credible witness? But like a lot of police station interviews nowadays, there is an element of, well, if somebody is potentially in a high risk group, or if there is some other reason why we couldn't meet this person in a COVID secure environment, then do it via Zoom. But the hope is, I suppose we're all hoping that this pandemic won't go on forever, and there will be a stage where you take all that work and you back it up by actually meeting the person in real life and getting them to affirm their statement.
Well, yeah, you're right, 100%. We all are hoping that 2021 is going to bring us something completely different, but I think this might be going on for quite a while. And also, some of the elements that you mentioned there, it should be adapted as well, because obviously we've been following a certain route for every job forever, and this has thrown a bit of a spanner in the works to try and change the way that we're all working.
Yeah, I think what I'm most resistant to is taking shortcuts for shortcuts' sake. I think it's very easy to say, right, now we've got this technology, we should use it, and of course we should in appropriate circumstances. But when something we touched on was police interviews, and when you attend a police station, to represent somebody who is, remember, at that stage only accused of a crime. You know, the police arrest somebody, they take them into a police station. At that point, they're innocent until proven guilty. So they have the right to a solicitor. Ordinarily, pre-pandemic, you would never ever take confidential instructions from your client over a telephone. You know, it's sort of police station 101. If a client is on the phone to you saying, please come down and represent me at the police station, and they start giving you instructions about what's happened, you say, well, hang on a second, wait till I'm there, we'll talk face to face, we'll make notes, because everything that you're saying is probably being overheard right now. So what do we do now when we have a situation where the police officer rings up and says, right, you can't come to the police station, but we're going to do it over a laptop? It's a tricky situation.
Yeah, that sounds a bit worrying as well. That's probably one of the challenges that it's going to be facing as we go forward. But, you know, if you can't get into that place, that's the best of the bad situation, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I have conducted interviews both ways over the last few months. So we have done an interview over a laptop. And I suppose what I was astounded by was the lack of any sort of, government backed program or system for doing the interview. I mean, it was literally the police officer had a laptop and they were using Zoom, and she just said, oh, I'm going to leave my laptop in the room so you can have a chat with your client. But just make sure he doesn't touch anything else because all my notes are on the laptop. I thought, well, okay, that's your risk to run. But if you're happy to leave, you know, a defendant in a serious organized crime gang case to sit in front of your laptop completely unsecured, that's up to you. I mean, nothing went wrong, but that was fairly astounding. The other way around, I've had a police officer say, look, so a National Crime Agency officer, the NCA, very, very serious organization. They said, look, we're happy for you to come to the police station. So I said, okay, fine, let's go. When I went to the police station, COVID security was as far away from these guys' minds as you can imagine. I mean, we were sat in an interview room, which, you know, generally they're about 4 foot by 6 foot anyway at the best of times, under a sign which said 3 people maximum, and there were 4 of us. And the only 2 people who were wearing masks in that room were myself and the defendant. So, you know, when I said to the officers, are you guys not going to wear masks? They sort of insinuated they were too tough to need to wear those masks. So it was bizarre. And then we obviously conducted the whole interview with them firing questions away, and my client just saying no comment from behind his mask. So it has been a bizarre period of time.
I mean, that just sounds dangerous. That's like you putting yourself at risk to help your client who needs you, who's called you, for 2 people who think that they're above a virus. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, I'm lucky enough that I have I see a variety of stages of the case now. So I will get involved in interviews. I will get involved in preparation, going to court, client meeting, you know, all that sort of stuff. But a lot of my time is from behind a desk. But I have colleagues in the industry whose jobs it is to be at the police station day in, day out. You know, that's what they do. That these guys are the equivalent of the, you know, frontline workers. And, you know, you tend to call them police station accredited representatives. And their only function really is to go to the police station and represent people who are under arrest. And, you know, these people are, that they are risking their lives on a daily basis going into these police stations. And I suppose what I was astounded by was that actually, of course, the police are risking their lives as well. You know, they're as exposed to it as anybody else, but there seems to be an institutional pressure from their side to just sort of get on with it.
I think in society at the moment, though, there's such a differentiation between certain people who think that they should, and then the people who just don't. So I think that's going to be the case in every industry. There's some people who just think that they're above wearing masks for whatever reason. You can't argue with the way that people's minds works. But yeah, it's not great if they feel like they've been bullied into it. But we won't go into that too much because that's not for us to say. So on a different note, really, you tell me, like, do you have a favorite case that you like loved working on, and you know, you still have it as one of your favorites?
I suppose I do, yeah. And it's probably the first case I ever worked on, actually, and was probably the most exciting entry into criminal law that anyone could hope for, really. I remember when I started, I went to King's College London, and they had a huge focus on commercial law. So you'd have a big long troop of shiny commercial lawyers coming to talk to the students, saying, come work in the city and earn loads of money and do all that sort of stuff, mergers and acquisitions. And it never really did it for me, to be honest. And I was looking to sort of, perhaps I did a law degree, and I thought to myself, well, I'm not going to use it. I'll go and do something else. But at the last moment, I took some work experience with a small firm in central London who did criminal work. And my first day when I arrived there, I was told to get in a taxi with a couple of archive boxes of files, take it down to a couple of guys who were on remand awaiting trial at Brixton Prison, and deliver them boxes. So, like a dutiful law student, I read everything I could in the time that was allowed. When I got down to Brixton Prison, sure enough, I was taken through all the security measures, search things in the locker, brought into an interview room, and there were these two guys, and they were accused of being the two heads of an East London organised crime gang. They had been under surveillance by the Flying Squad, who obviously the Metropolitan Police, who deal with armed robberies. They've been under surveillance for about 6 months. And what these guys had planned to do was carry out an inside job on Gatwick Airport, and get away with £1 million worth of cash that was being delivered by Securicor. And they did do it. As in, they got away with the money. And what they didn't realize, of course, was that because they'd been under surveillance for that past 6 months, the police knew exactly what they were up to and sort of arrested them on the way out. But the case had everything. That it had an inside man. It had a van that had been dressed up to look like a Securicor van. They had fake paperwork, fake uniforms, and the two of them were, their grand plan was to open a casino in East London, and I think they kind of had a view of themselves that they could be good fellas. So it was a great case, and for basically my first day on the job, to walk into Brixton Prison and meet these two guys who were very, very personable, by the way, hugely personable, very, very nice to their representatives, and have such an exciting case. That one definitely sticks with me.
I mean, I guess you've got to be personable if you're going to open a casino, right? Which is just like the weirdest idea. That sounds like a movie. It really does.
Exactly. I mean, that's why it sticks to my mind. I mean, there are many other cases that stick in my mind for less sort of glamorous reasons. Unfortunately, I have represented people in all sorts of situations, and including sex cases and murder cases, which are much more morose, obviously.
Yeah, well, you definitely won't be like recalling those stories around the dinner table, will you? About something.
No, although they are always the ones that people at dinner parties, I suppose, are most interested in, because they involve human interaction, I guess.
I'm the same. I'm a former crime scene investigator, and every time anyone asks me, they're like, "What's the grossest thing you've seen? What's the worst thing you've seen?" And it's like, these are people, right? Like, but that's what I think. True crime's taken off, hasn't it? So obviously always going to be popular. But fraud's so fascinating because of like the amount of time and energy that people have to put in to basically getting away with stuff. It's astounding that they don't do that just to go get a normal job.
Well, I mean, a lot of the time you just think, well, if some of these people put their minds to a normal job, they would become rich anyway. It would just probably take them slightly longer. I've had loads of clients like that. Absolutely right. I mean, fraud cases can be just as emotional, actually, because of course somebody having their life savings taken from them, sometimes is no less emotional than having a house burgled, maybe sometimes more, because there's always an element when somebody is defrauded of their participation. They've often, they've allowed themselves, in their minds, they've allowed themselves to accept the lies that have been told to them. One of the biggest cases I was involved in was the first prosecution by the Financial Conduct Authority, after they rebranded from the Financial Services Authority to the FCA. And what they did was they prosecuted 8 people who had been involved in a land banking scheme around the Kent and Essex area. So that the basic premise was you had a company that was selling chunks of land to members of the public, which they said had planning permission from anybody from Tesco's to a new shopping centre, and that if you purchased a piece of land for, say, £40,000, within 3 months it would then be worth £120,000. Sounds too good to be true. Well, it was, but it didn't stop several hundred people investing in this scheme. And the fraudsters netted over £4 million in this way. So it was a pretty big deal. And when you looked at the individual people who had been defrauded, it was a variety of people from vulnerable elderly people. Yes, they were involved in the case, but there were also sophisticated investors who had a wide range of portfolio investments, and they just thought, well, this is worth a punt, frankly, and they were all taken in by the same scheme.
Gosh, you just think about how charming those people must have been, and how aware to make sure that they get their right documents, to all of that stuff that you have to make sure that you can answer all the questions to those people that have been defrauded there. And it's just so much effort for me to even think about doing that. But £4 million, they didn't get away with it, did they? So it didn't all work out in their favor.
That's true. I mean, I was defending in this case, and we represented 4 of the defendants, and 2 of them were acquitted. Actually, they were found not guilty of the fraud. They were, but the differential, I suppose, is that the salesmen were convicted, but the 2 who weren't salesmen, the back office function, I guess the jury believed that actually they didn't know that the investments were fraudulent. I mean, you say that there's a huge amount of effort that goes in. Well, actually, it was run like a totally legitimate company. It's just that the underlying the sales technique was essentially lying about how much these bits of land were worth. But they did own the land in most of the cases, and they did sell the land legitimately to people. But what was not legitimate was the lies they told about what use and how much land was worth.
They just wanted that. They just were a bit greedy, didn't they? Really, they just pushed it a bit too far. But I guess also with the back office people, they're just doing a job, as you rightly say, and less people know about frauds and the things that you're doing, probably for the better.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I always thought of that case actually as a bit like, I mean, this case was before the film came out, but do you remember The Wolf of Wall Street?
I haven't seen it, but I've heard it's good, right?
You should give it a watch. It's pretty entertaining, and this case wasn't too far off that, actually.
Oh, okay. Well, we can compare and contrast. Do a review of Wolf of Wall Street with your knowledge of everything that you've already done. That's a different kind of podcast. That could be something.
I could absolutely. I've seen those podcasts where experts comment on the realism.
There you go. You've got a new career coming your way. Well, Lee, I'm going to leave you there. Thank you so much for coming on to talk about your career and the fascinating insights into what you've been doing. And I know that you've got so many more stories to tell, but I will let you get back to work today, though. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your time, Alex.
Thank you very much for watching today. I hope you enjoyed that chat with Lee there. Please do subscribe. Also, get in touch if you want to hear about any aspect of crime or criminal law. Until next time.